I had the pleasure of sitting down with two Wyoming game and fish biologists, Joe Sandrini and Erica Peckham, from the Northeast region of the state to discuss hunting in the upcoming season.
Okay, I'm originally from Michigan and had been working environmental consulting prior to working for the Game and Fish, and that landed me in Gillette. So I was there for a couple years with that, and then an opportunity presented itself with the Wyoming Game and Fish as a habitat biologist. So I got on probably about 14 years ago doing that, and did that for a few years in Gillette, and then transferred to this position about 10 years ago.
Oh, okay, very nice. And how about yourself, Joe?
Well, I grew up all around the country. My dad was in the Navy, and once I finished my schooling down in Colorado, I was hired on as a game warden up here, and I did that for 10 years, and I've been a wildlife biologist for the last 20, almost all of that in Northeast Wyoming.
Okay. And when you say wildlife biologist, just briefly, I'm sure it's a kind of a broad question, but what does that mean? What does that day-to-day thing or tasks look like for you guys?
It really varies day by day, kind of throughout the year. Similar duties at similar times that are expected, but I would say overall managing the big game species within this corner of the state, so conducting population surveys, adjusting hunting season, talking to hunters, and then a whole variety of other things that pop up.
Okay.
Yeah, we don't cover just the big game species, but that's where our emphasis is. We also cover the birds, and occasionally we do work with non-game animals as well.
What's the first thing a hunter should do to be prepared to go hunting?
Well, they need to decide what they want to hunt. And at least as far as our big game species go, we have two types of licenses. One are general licenses for residents, and they're over the counter and not limited in number. And in Northeast Wyoming, you can hunt deer in several locations and elk with a general license. We also have limited quota licenses, which are limited in number, and those you need to apply for. And they cover all of the antelope hunting in Northeast Wyoming, some of the deer hunting, and the majority of the elk hunting up here. And so you need to apply for a license beginning after the first of the year and before the end of May.
For me, I would say the emphasis on this corner of the state, it's predominantly private land. So there may be a lot of licenses available some years, but access is the biggest issue. So to me, when I'm fielding phone calls from folks, I would say to put an emphasis on finding where you're going to hunt, securing private land access, and having that part planned out.
Yeah, and that's really important, because the way we issue licenses, they're split between residents and non-residents. 20% of the antelope and deer tags go to non-residents, the other 80 to residents. With elk, it's a 16-84 split.
Gotcha.
But because of all the private land up here, a lot of the residents don't tend to hunt here. They want to go to the western side of the state where there's more public land. And so the licenses that they don't purchase get rolled over into the non-resident quota.
Okay.
And so consequently, we end up with majority non-resident hunters in Northeast Wyoming.
Where's a good place, I guess, for those hunters to find out information maybe on what's public land or the resources to help them with that when they come, especially if they're out of state?
We have a hunt planner on our website. And they can go there, and there's different layers. They can overlay their hunt area with the land ownership, with some of our walk-in or hunter management areas. There's a little bit of information on there as far as what the populations are doing, contact information if they'd like to talk to a game warden or a biologist, and those kind of things. And that's the first place that I would send them.
So the three big ones for Northeast Wyoming really are the pronghorn, the deer, and the elk. How do you guys manage how many licenses there are for each one of those then?
Yeah, it's a dynamic process every year. So let's just use the pronghorn for example. So during August this time of year, Joe and I and the game wardens are going out and conducting our classification counts. So we're driving routes that are assigned every year, and so we'll take that information and then along with the hunter harvest information. And so we'll go through that in the spring during our season setting process. So at that time, we're reviewing the numbers from hunting season, compiling all of that, using a model to kind of predict what the population is, and we're managing for a certain number, which is the population objective for each given herd.
Yeah, it's impossible for us to go out and count all of the animals. And so what we do when we're talking these classification counts, we look at the number of bucks compared to does, fawns compared to does, yearling bucks compared to does, and how those change over time with a given harvest level plus doing some other surveys where, for example, antelope, we can do a deal where we fly over them, and they're a lot more visible than deer and elk, and so we can get an approximate density of antelope on the landscape. And as Erica was saying, we take all that, and public input's very important as well, because we can't be everywhere all the time, whereas some of the sportsmen and landowners especially know what's going on their place.
Gotcha. And how many, on an average, because obviously it fluctuates, but how many licenses do we usually hand out in this?
What's interesting is just in the Black Hills, so there's 6 deer hunt areas up there. We have, when we're in the deer business, close to 10,000 licenses there alone. Oh, wow. In fact, when we're in the deer business, 1 out of every 5 deer killed in Wyoming comes out of the Black Hills. Really? Wow. You look at the antelope herds in Northeast Wyoming, and it's got to be pushing over 50% of the harvest in the state. Wow. And so the number of animals, big game animals that we harvest up here, especially deer and antelope compared to the rest of the states, I mean, it's above and beyond anything else. Yeah. Elk, we only run about 2 to 5% of the harvest because we don't have as many elk compared to the rest of the state. But yeah.
And you were kind of talking about, even before we came on, that a lot of the hunters in this area or this region of the state are out-of-staters, so which is kind of nice that they come to this region and you know, spend their money and help us economically.
And with the number of licenses that we sell and the number of hunters that we host, those non-resident licenses cost quite a bit more than a resident. And so, at least economically to the department, paying for conservation, for wildlife management, the hunters do that through their license fees and taxes on firearms and ammunition. And the deer and antelope hunters in Northeast Wyoming are responsible, especially the non-residents, are responsible for a huge portion of our budget every year. One difference that we have now with chronic wasting disease, or CWD, is the parts of their deer or elk that they can take out of state are limited. Gotcha. So they can only haul out boned meat and then either the skull cap or skull with all of the brain matter cleaned out of it. CWD is a neurological disease. It's caused by an agent called a prion. It's not a virus or a bacteria. It's actually a protein that changes shape and causes similar proteins to change shape, and they bond on to some of the nervous tissue and kill it off and cause holes in the nervous system. And so to prevent the spread of that, we ask that folks, their carcasses except for their meat and their clean skull cap or skull, either stay in the field where they killed it or it goes to a public landfill, certified landfill. And so hunters going out of state, to prevent the spread, they can only take those things out of state.
Gotcha. And is that something we've been seeing a lot more in Northeast Wyoming, or?
It's here and there. It's not a high prevalence yet, or as high in other parts as it is in other parts of the state, but it's certainly present. Okay.
Yeah, and well, this year our Black Hills elk herd, and I don't know where some of your Black Hills deer herd, and
Pumpkin Buttes deer herd
are our emphasis areas. So we're trying to get a whole bunch of samples to determine what the prevalence is. Okay. There's no evidence that people can get chronic wasting disease. Gotcha. Some places in the state have 40 to 60% prevalence. And so there's a lot of folks that have eaten a lot of chronic wasting disease infected deer and don't know it. And but Game and Fish isn't a human health agency. And so the Centers for Disease Control and National Institute of Health, to be on the safe side, conservative side, they say if your deer tests positive or your elk, gotcha, you probably don't want to eat it.
And I guess too, why is hunting important though? I mean, what are some of those benefits?
Because a lot of the normal control mechanisms that were in ecosystems and populations before the West was settled aren't there anymore. So for example, we don't have too many grizzly bears and wolves in Campbell County, but we have a lot more ravens and coyotes than we ever did. And the habitat has changed as well over time. And so hunting's our primary management tool. That's how we regulate populations. If we want to bring a population down, we increase hunting. If we want to bring a population up, we decrease hunting as far as season length, number of licenses, and those kind of things. And so not only do hunters fund well over 90% of all the conservation, hunted and non-hunted species with their license and tax dollars, they're the ones that actually do the management on the ground. They're our tool in our toolbox, and really our biggest one. There's other things such as habitat that can be altered, and maybe you want to talk about that.
we can do different things to enhance the habitat. I guess one kind of on the ground example close to where we are right now is there are some deer collared just south of here. And it's in a herd that kind of suppressed numbers, not great fawn production, and I'm kind of curious as to why there's sometimes a lot more questions than answers, and so that's one of those areas where, I don't know, I have questions about what's going on. So we have these deer collared there, and that'll be for about 5 years. And then we'll get fine scale data. We can see what areas they're keying in on at important times, like where are they wintering, where are they fawning. So my hopes are, and just an example as far as habitat, is to key in on those areas, really look at them and see if there's some things that we could do to bolster that habitat for them in the habitat they use during those important times. So maybe around here it could be there's a large amount of cheatgrass on the landscape. That could increase fires. It's not good for the habitat. So there's things that we can employ to maybe control that. That would be just one example.
So what are some of the problems that you guys come across with, or things that maybe hunters do that they shouldn't do on a typical hunting season?
Yeah, hunting is a highly regulated activity because we need to control the numbers of hunters, what they're killing, when they're killing it, harvesting, and that sort of thing. And so there's some common violations that we run into in the game wardens every fall. The vast majority of folks that come out and hunt are well-intended. They're not out there to poach. It's only maybe 5% that are the bad eggs that poach. But some of the things that get folks in trouble, and a lot of times they're just excited, they just harvested a great animal, they're having a good time. Failing to tag is a big one. So before someone leaves the site of their kill, they have to sign, date, and detach their carcass coupon, and if they're not transporting the animal, have it on there. Another thing is hunter safety. So every hunter born after January 1st, 1966 has to take hunter safety and bring their hunter safety card with them. They don't always remember to do that, and it's not our job to go check and make sure if they've had the class. Shooting from vehicles and off roads. Almost all of our hunting accidents in Wyoming have to do with firearms in and around vehicles, and part of it has to do with ethical behavior as well. So you're not allowed to shoot out of a vehicle at any type of game animal, and you can't shoot from a public road. So you have to either be across the road right-of-way fence or 30 feet from the edge of the road. Probably in Northeast Wyoming, one of the biggest is trespass. There's two types of trespass: game and fish trespass and criminal trespass. And with game and fish trespass, if you're hunting, fishing, trapping, or collecting antlers, it's on you to know where you're at. Okay, you don't have to go by a sign. You don't have to talk to anybody. Nobody has to tell you anything. It's up to you to be in the right spot and not be trespassing. Versus criminal trespass, where you have to be notified or go past a sign. There's a lot of tools available now to help hunters with that: GPS, mapping apps for their phones. But our game wardens spend a lot of time in Northeast Wyoming chasing down trespass calls.
A lot of non-residents will ask if they have to mandatorily check in their animal because that's a requirement in other states. Do not have to do that here, but the thing that you do have to do is if you're driving and you pass or come up to a game check station, you're required to stop if you've been hunting, and that is whether or not you have harvested an animal or not, because we can't tell that from the road as you drive by. So typically there will be a few signs leading up to the check station, and then department vehicles and personnel.
Gotcha. So yeah, is there any new things or regulations or something just completely new for this upcoming hunting season that maybe wasn't happening in previous years?
I would say nothing new regulation-wise, but the biggest thing would be a reduction in antelope licenses kind of across the board in this area of the state. And that's a function of winters, drought conditions, and disease in some cases. So in particular, Hunt Area 17, which is northwest of Gillette, experienced a disease issue. It was Mycoplasma bovis in 2019 and 2020, and it had not previously been documented in pronghorn. We don't see any evidence that it surfaced in 2021, but it did affect a number of animals. So at that time, licenses were reduced and have been kept low and reduced even a little bit more.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, and I worked my first hunting season in Northeast Wyoming in 1992. And pronghorn numbers, at least in my district, are probably about the lowest I've seen them. And as Erica said, I mean, between low fawn production and high mortality on fawns and adults, our populations have really dropped, and consequently our license issuance is way down as well this year. So there is one new regulation, that's actually a statute that we have this year, and the minimum age to hunt bigger trophy game is 12.
Okay.
But the legislature, we're trying to encourage more hunters and younger hunters. So now if a youngster's 11, but they turn 12 before the end of the year, they can hunt big game. And you can buy a license before you're 12, as long as you're 12 or going to turn 12 by the end of the year, before the season. But they do have to hunt with an adult, and there's some other rules that go with it. But we are really trying to encourage young hunters.